Hi scribes, welcome back to the Literary Lori YouTube channel. I'm Literary Lori, and I decided to do the AuthorTube newbie tag so that everybody could get to know me a little bit better. Even though I don't consider this necessarily an AuthorTube channel per se, I am an author, so I thought it would be fun to do this again so people could get to know me a little bit better. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so I checked out the AuthorTube questions and I jotted them down in my yellow notebook. I love the color yellow, as you can see. So I'm going to literally read the questions off and pretend I'm interviewing myself, which is something I'm very familiar with doing, not interviewing myself, interviewing other people, because I am a journalist by training. I've spent more than 20 years as a journalist interviewing people. I'm also a podcast host. So again, I interview people a lot. So I'm just going to pretend that I'm interviewing myself, and I hope you enjoy it. And again, I hope you get to know me a little bit better. So let's get into it. First question, Lori, how did you find out about AuthorTube? I think this is a basic question. I found out about AuthorTube because I Googled authors on YouTube. And I'm going to be 100% honest, I have not been a YouTuber. I mean, I don't watch YouTube like other people do. I haven't gotten into YouTube communities. I'm much more coming from the podcast space. But when I started thinking about doing a YouTube channel, I obviously looked for people that I would be interested in learning from or being a part of their lives, and looked up authors and book people and booktube, which of course I've heard about, and then found AuthorTube. And I thought, well, that feels like more of my space because I am an author and that's kind of how I identify most. So it was the Google SEO engine, basically. That's how I found AuthorTube, looking up things that I'm interested in. And when I saw the tag for a newbie tag, I thought that sounded interesting and I liked it because it allowed me to get to know the people who I started to follow. So thank you SEO, thank you YouTube algorithm. That's how I found AuthorTube. Question number 2, what genres do I write in? Well, as a matter of fact, I actually have right here all of the books that I've written. Well, most of the books that I've written. So this question for me, what genres do I write in? I write everything. When people ask me, well, what kind of writer are you? I'm a writer. I write everything. Like I said, my background is in journalism. My first book was this hair story, Untangling the Roots of Black Hair in America. And this is a chronological history of Black people and their hair from 15th century Africa to 21st century America. So I would call that straight nonfiction. My second book was a memoir called Kinky Gazpacho. It's a memoir, so that's creative nonfiction. My third book was a novel, Substitute Me, which is an excellent book. It's about a white woman and a Black woman whose lives intersect when the white woman who just had a new baby hires the Black woman to be her nanny. And the story is told in alternating POVs, the white woman and the Black woman. And you get to see what happens when their lives intersect and what happens when a woman hires another woman to take her place in the household. No spoilers, but it's a juicy one, and I would consider this book club fiction, even though at the time that it came out, that category, book club fiction, didn't exist. I would totally call it book club fiction. It is a very good book, very juicy, and lots to discuss when you're done. The next book I wrote was called Same Family, Different Colors, Confronting Colorism in America's Diverse Families. And this is a story, the book, it's nonfiction. It is like Hair Story. It's charting the history of colorism in the African American community, in the Latino community, in the Asian American community, and in the mixed race community, if you will. So I go all the way back, as far back in history as I could, to figure out why people, started embracing a color hierarchy, a skin color hierarchy, and then talked about how colorism manifests in individual families. So I think this is probably the best book I've ever written. It's very important. There's not a lot written about colorism in this way, particularly as it impacts families. So nonfiction, journalism. And then I've also started ghostwriting in the last part of my career. I should say the second half of my career, I started ghostwriting. This is probably the most well-known book that I ghost wrote, called The Redemption of Bobby Love. This was a story that started on, that got famous on the Humans of New York platform. And it's about a man who robbed banks, got caught by the police, but then escaped from prison and lived a law-abiding life for over 30, 40 years, and then got recaptured by the police. And so this is his and his wife's story told in alternating chapters. And this was a very exciting book to write, and I liked it very much. And I've written a couple of other ghostwriting books as well. So those are the genres I write in. Right now, currently, even though I have a larger or more prominent nonfiction background, I am now diving deep into fiction. I consider myself a storyteller because I like to tell stories. And whatever the platform or medium that they're in, again, whether it's nonfiction, fiction, for children, for adults, I find the best way to tell the story and then I tell it. All right, so the next question is, what is your preferred tense? That just, to me, like, whatever the story dictates, that's what I'm doing. So the young adult / middle grade novel that I wrote is present tense. The adult novel that I wrote is close POV, past tense. So it really just depends on whatever the story dictates. All right, next question. Plotter or pantser? I am a total plotter. I believe in outlines like other people believe in Jesus. Everything I write, fiction and nonfiction, I write outlines first. And I also teach writing. I have a writing community. I am serious about outlining first. And I call outlines maps because I think they give writers direction. They know where they're going. If you don't use outlines, if you're a pantser, more power to you. But as a writing teacher, as a writing instructor, and as a writer myself, when people ask me for advice, even if it's the loosest version of an outline, I think that's super helpful, not only for the storytelling, but also because it helps writers stay on task. A lot of times your life gets crazy and you don't have the ability to write every single day. Sometimes you have to, there's time in between. If you have an outline of some sort, it's easy to go, to stop and start as life requires. You don't have to try to get back into the story as much because you have this outline telling you where you were and where you're going. So that's my opinion. I am team outline, team planner all the way. All right, next question. Traditionally published or self-published? So everything I've done is traditionally published, and I would like to continue to traditionally publish, but I also look at kind of the entrepreneurial part of myself is very interested in the idea of self-publishing, so stay tuned for that. All right, what are you going to post as an author on YouTube? So what are you guys going to see on this channel? So if you look at my channel, it says I want to share my literary life, and that's what I wanted to do. And that's why I came to YouTube, because I feel like one of the things that I wanted to do more than anything when I moved to Spain. So if you guys are totally new here and you don't know this, I've lived in the United States my entire life. And then in 2021, I moved to Spain with my family. My husband is Spanish, so it wasn't such a dramatic thing for us to do. But we have lived our whole life, raised our kids in the US, but I've always wanted to live abroad. One of the reasons I wanted to become a writer was because I thought I could write anywhere in the world, and I had a vision for myself to be a global writer. I just saw myself traveling all over the world, telling amazing stories, and it took me until I was almost 50 years old to do that. And so one of the things that I promised myself when I moved to Spain was that I really was gonna live a literary, creative life. And I want to show that to people. And it's hard to do that. I have a podcast, I have a blog, I write articles, but how do I showcase the lifestyle? Where do I showcase that? And I realized that the best place to do that was on YouTube, because, living a literary life is visual, it's active, and it could be as simple as, taking a exploration and finding the local library in this foreign country where I'm visiting. Whenever I travel, I want to find the libraries or these bookstores or maybe a literary hotel. So that's what I wanted to share on AuthorTube. That's why I'm not sure this is really a traditional AuthorTube channel. You can call this a AuthorTube-ish channel, but that's what I will be sharing here on AuthorTube. I'll be sharing my travels. Now that I live in Europe, I have access to parts of the world that weren't so easy to access living in the United States. I want to share my life as a writer who is trying to get more books traditionally published. So I'll be talking about my journey doing those things. I'll be talking about my literary travels, any itineraries or fun places that I've discovered. Because I'm a writing instructor, I'll also be sharing some tips, tricks, advice that I have that I think will make your writing life better. So I want people to look at my channel as inspirational, motivational, fun, almost like armchair traveling through somebody else's life. And I do have to say that the stories that I like to tell and the stories I like to read tend to center the lives of Black people and other people of color. And I'm really fascinated about these stories that have been untold. So I'm always looking for those hidden figure stories of Black people in places as far away as, I don't know, somewhere in Asia, or, like there's a woman who's got a soul food restaurant in Japan. And I'm like, I'd love to tell her story. I'm very interested in the history of Africans in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. So I'm always telling those stories and looking for more. In fact, one of the stories that I'm working on, the novel I'm working on, incorporates the story of a enslaved Black woman in the 17th century in Spain, even though it's a contemporary novel. So those are the kinds of stories that I'm interested in. That's the kind of content I will be talking about. So if you are a BIPoC writer, no matter what it's about, my literary life, it'll always have color to it, okay? So, next question. When did you start writing? Officially, I say I started writing when I was 8 years old because my mother bought me an antique Remington typewriter, and I started, in earnest, falling in love with the idea that the stories that were in my head, I could put them on paper and share them with other people. I wrote all kinds of stories, literally starting when I was 8 years old. And because I had that typewriter, they felt real. And I still have most of them because, no, I'm not a hoarder, okay? I'm not a hoarder. I just happen to keep everything that I've ever written. So I have boxes of journals. I have folders full of all of my stories that I've ever written. So the first story I ever wrote, I guess I'll say the first book I wrote was Hair Story, which I talked about already. And that came out in 2001. But then we updated it, and I say we because I co-wrote it with a good friend of mine, Ayana Bird, who's an amazing journalist and writer herself. We updated it in 2014. So it came out in 2001 originally, and then it came out again in 2014. Next question. What authors inspired you? All right, so I always say that most writers were readers first, and I'm no different. I was a voracious reader as a child. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was surrounded mostly by white people and white culture, and the books I read were by white authors. So I read Harriet the Spy. I read all of the Anne of Green Gables books. I read all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. I read the Bowers, the Littles, all of them. And then I went through a romance phase. I read a lot of Harlequin romance novels, and then those bigger, thicker bodice ripper. What are those called? I don't know what they're called. Point being, I just didn't know any Black authors, really. Growing up, I didn't know of any. So when I read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and then I read Lorraine Cary's Black Ice, which was about a Black girl who went to boarding school with mostly white students, I felt seen. I was like, oh my gosh, there are other people out there like me. Maya Angelou's books, I read, once I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, I just gobbled up all of her memoirs. If you didn't know, Maya Angelou wrote 9 memoirs. So they inspired me to tell my story. They inspired me in the way that reading their books saved me from feeling so isolated and alone as a Black female who was the only Black girl in my classes, in my school, in my sports, and my extracurriculars. Reading their stories gave me comfort. And that's when I realized, well, I want to do the same thing. I want to write in a way that's going to help other people not feel alone and not feel that their experience is unique in the sense that there are other people like you out there. Because that's what those books did for me. And that's why I love memoir so much today. I teach memoir, I read memoir. I have a whole shelf on my bookcase just devoted to memoir. And that's what motivated me. And that's why I wrote my memoir, Kinky Gazpacho. And I'm so happy that the biggest response that I've gotten from that book is thank you. And I relate to you in so many different ways, even if it's not a Black person because Kinky Gazpacho is a lot about my experience traveling and being in Spain. Even if that's not their experience specifically, it was feeling that the people who read my book had a similar experience of feeling left out or isolated in some way in their upbringing, and then were able to find themselves or define themselves by traveling. So That made me super happy because that's why I wrote the book and that's why I continue to write. All right, next question. Where do I write? I think that's what that says. I can't read my writing very much. I have very bad handwriting. My daughter always says I should have been a doctor with my bad handwriting. But anyway, where do I write? I write usually at my desk in my office. Now that I live in Spain, I'm very lucky that I live in a beautiful area, and right outside my office, I look at palm trees and beautiful flowers. So I would love to like have an office to go to, but I'm like, where could I go that's more beautiful than where I live right now? Nowhere. So I mostly write in my office, but yeah, I write in my office. So last question. What am I looking forward to as an AuthorTuber? I am really looking forward to two things. One, I'm really looking forward to just having a place to collect my literary life experiences. I love my literary life. And when I moved to Spain, I said to myself, like, you are going to live the life you always dreamed of as a writer. And it took me a while to like really embrace that because I've had to like really ask myself, what does it mean to lead a literary life? And so as I'm discovering that, I want to catalog it. I want to, keep track. I want to have a living document of my literary life. So creating this channel is really my opportunity to have something that I can look back on and be like, oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, that's what a literary life is. And then the other part of it is I'm being very, very strategic, if you will, because I want to show other people what a literary life can look like. I want to highlight other writers of color. I want to highlight the contributions of other writers of color. I want to show people what's possible. I think it's really important when people have the opportunity to live a life based around creative pursuits, when so many times we're told it's impossible, right? That's not something you can do as a woman. That's not something you can do as a person of color, as a Black person. So sharing my literary life here on YouTube, that's what I'm excited about. And I hope that it inspires other people. I hope that if you're watching this and you have ideas about locations I should go to, things that I should be doing, places I should see, books that I should read, oh my gosh, please leave them in the comments. I would love to get your ideas. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to, I won a grant to go to Ghana as part of the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora. And I will be in Ghana writing for a month and connecting with other writers from the African diaspora, including those in Africa. So that's one thing I'm really excited about, is to really dive into the literary scene in West Africa. And you might see more content about the African literary scene because I'm getting ready to do that. And when I'm in Africa, when I'm in Ghana this spring, you will see me there. So look forward to that too. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I really am welcoming anybody who wants to come along this literary journey with me to, subscribe and join along and again, share your thoughts. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.